The leather-bound diary slipped from beneath the seat just as Emmett Crawford stood to disembark the train, its worn cover catching the afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows of the passenger car. He bent down, fingers closing around the small book, and glanced around the nearly empty compartment to see who might have left it behind. Only an elderly woman dozed in the corner, her head tilted against the window, and a traveling salesman shuffled toward the exit with his cases. Neither seemed the type to keep such a journal, delicate and feminine as it appeared, with a faded blue ribbon marking a place within its pages. Emmett turned the diary over in his calloused hands, debating whether to leave it with the conductor or attempt to find its owner himself. The train had made several stops between Kansas City and this final destination in southwestern Missouri, picking up and dropping off passengers at each small town along the route. The owner could be anywhere by now, probably already missing this precious item. He should have handed it over immediately, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way the leather had been worn smooth by frequent handling, or the care someone had taken to tie that ribbon just so. This was important to someone. This mattered. The conductor called out the final warning for Silver Reef, Missouri, and Emmett tucked the diary into his coat pocket, making a silent promise to find a way to return it. He grabbed his saddlebag and rifle case, stepping down onto the platform where the late afternoon sun of June, 1882, painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Silver Reef was a mining town that had seen better days, though it still held on to enough silver prospects to keep folks hopeful. Emmett had come here looking for work, having heard the ranches outside town needed experienced hands for the summer season. He found lodging at a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a woman with kind eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron. After settling into his small room and washing away the grime of travel, Emmett sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out the diary. He knew he should not read it. A person's private thoughts were sacred, not meant for strangers' eyes. But how else would he discover who it belonged to? Surely there would be a name, an address, some clue to guide him. The ribbon marked an entry dated 3 weeks prior. Emmett opened to that page, telling himself he would read only enough to identify the owner, nothing more. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as though the words had poured out faster than the pen could capture them. I cannot stay in Carthage any longer. Father has made arrangements with Mr. Winters, and though I have begged him to reconsider, he will not hear my pleas. How can I marry a man I do not love? A man who looks at me as though I am property to be acquired, another asset to add to his holdings. Mother would have understood. She always said love was the only foundation worth building a life upon. But Mother has been gone these 5 years, and Father believes practical matters outweigh romantic notions. I leave tomorrow for Silver Reef, where Aunt Clara has agreed to take me in. Perhaps distance will make Father see reason, or perhaps I am simply running toward an uncertain future. Either way, I cannot walk down that aisle. I cannot. Emmett's chest tightened as he read. He knew something of forced obligations and paths others tried to choose for you. His own father had wanted him to take over the family farm in Tennessee, to settle into the same plot of land that had been in the Crawford family for generations. But Emmett had wanted to see the country, to make his own way, to choose his own direction. The disappointment in his father's eyes when he left still haunted him sometimes, but he had never regretted the choice. He flipped back to earlier entries, learning that the writer was named Margaret, though she preferred Maggie. She loved poetry and could spend hours watching thunderstorms roll across the prairie. She had a younger brother named Thomas, who collected interesting rocks, and a father who owned a feed store in Carthage, Missouri. Her mother had died when Maggie was 17, leaving her to manage the household while her father grew increasingly distant, burying his grief in work and whiskey. The entries painted a picture of an intelligent, spirited woman trapped by circumstances and expectations. She wrote about feeling invisible, about conversations where men spoke over her as though her thoughts held no weight. She wrote about watching her best friend Lucy marry for security rather than affection, and seeing the light slowly fade from Lucy's eyes. She wrote about dreams of becoming a teacher, of having her own classroom where she could encourage young minds to think freely and question boldly. As the evening shadows lengthened across his room, Emmett realized he had been reading for hours. He had meant to find only a name and address. Yet here he sat, the diary resting against his knees, his heart strangely invested in the story of this woman he had never met. Maggie had made it to Silver Reef, had been living with her Aunt Clara on Maple Street, but the most recent entry, written just 2 days ago, suggested she had been forced to move on. Aunt Clara received a letter from Father. He is coming here with Mr. Winters, convinced he can persuade me to return and honor the engagement. Clara, sweet as she is, cannot stand against Father when he sets his mind to something. I must leave again, though it breaks my heart to keep running. I heard there is a teaching position available in Springfield. It is a risk, traveling alone, but I have a little money saved, enough for the train fare and a few weeks' lodging while I seek employment. This diary has been my constant companion through all of this, the one place I can speak the truth without fear of judgment or consequence. I pray that someday I will look back on these pages and smile, remembering this as the time I found my courage. Springfield. She had been heading to Springfield, and this was the southbound train route. Emmett's mind raced through the calculations. If she had written that entry 2 days ago and had been planning to leave Aunt Clara's house, she likely would have taken this very train, possibly even sat in this same car. The diary must have slipped from her bag or pocket when she disembarked. But Springfield was the train's next major stop after Silver Reef, with at least 4 smaller towns in between where passengers could get on or off. She could be in any of them. Sleep eluded Emmett that night. He lay in the narrow bed, moonlight streaming through the thin curtains, thinking about Maggie and her words. He thought about her courage in leaving everything familiar, in choosing uncertainty over a life that would slowly suffocate her spirit. He thought about how desperate she must be right now, realizing her diary was gone, that record of her journey and her most private thoughts lost somewhere between one town and the next. By dawn, he had made his decision. He would find her. He would return this diary to its rightful owner, ensure she was safe, and then continue on with his own plans. It would delay his job search by a week or 2, but some things mattered more than schedules. A woman alone, moving from town to town with limited funds and family pressuring her into an unwanted marriage, facing a world that rarely treated independent women kindly, deserved whatever help he could offer. Emmett spent the morning asking questions around Silver Reef. He showed Maggie's description, cobbled together from her own writings and his imagination, to shopkeepers and hotel clerks. A young woman traveling alone, dark hair she described as never lying quite flat. Eyes she had once written were the color of creek water after a storm. The postmaster thought he might have seen someone matching that description purchasing stamps about 3 days prior, but he could not be certain. At Aunt Clara's house on Maple Street, Emmett found a tidy cottage with a garden full of roses. The woman who answered his knock was plump and worried-looking, probably in her middle 50s, with graying hair pinned back and kind eyes that immediately reminded him of Maggie's descriptions. "Pardon me, madam. I am looking for a Miss Margaret Nolan. I believe she might be your niece. I have something that belongs to her." Clara's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping out onto the porch and pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "Are you from her father? Because she is not here, and I do not know where she went." She left no forwarding address. "No, madam. I am not connected to her father or this Mr. Winters. I found something she lost, and I am trying to return it to her. That is all." Clara studied him with the piercing gaze of someone practiced at reading character. Whatever she saw in Emmett's face must have satisfied her because her shoulders relaxed slightly. "She was here, but she left 2 days ago. Said she could not risk staying after Frederick, her father, that is, sent word he was coming. She had been such a help to me, and I hated to see her go, but I understood. Sometimes we have to choose between disappointing others and losing ourselves entirely." "Did she say where she was headed?" "Springfield, though whether she meant it or said it to throw anyone off her trail, I cannot say. Maggie has learned to be careful about who knows her plans." Clara hesitated, then added, "What did she lose?" Emmett pulled the diary from his coat pocket, watching Clara's face transform with recognition and concern. "Oh no, she will be beside herself. She kept that with her always, wrote in it most evenings. It was her mother's before it became hers. I will find her and return it. You have my word." "Why would you do that? You do not even know her." Emmett considered the question, searching for an answer that made sense. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because she is alone out there and this matters to her. Because if I lost something this precious, I would hope someone would take the trouble to give it back." Clara's eyes grew misty. "You are a rare kind of man, Mr. Crawford. Emmett Crawford." "Well, Mr. Crawford, if you do find my niece, please tell her she is welcome back here any time. Tell her I will stand up to Frederick if it comes to that. I should have done so before, but I will not make that mistake again." Armed with this confirmation and blessing, Emmett headed to the train station to plan his search. Springfield was about 70 miles northeast, with stops in Verona, Aurora, Marionville, and Billings along the way. He could take the train to each town, spending a day or two in each to ask questions, or he could travel by horse, which would give him more flexibility but take considerably longer. Money was not abundant. He had been counting on finding work quickly, but he had enough saved to manage a week or two of searching if he was careful. The station master, a weathered man named Jim who had seen 40 years of passengers come and go, listened to Emmett's description and shook his head. "Lots of folks pass through here, son. Young women traveling alone are not as uncommon as they used to be, what with jobs opening up for teachers and such in the growing towns. But I tell you what, I do remember a gal from a couple days back because she seemed particularly nervous, kept looking over her shoulder like she expected trouble. Dark hair, pretty thing, carrying a carpet bag and a small trunk. She bought a ticket to Verona. Verona. Not Springfield, but the first stop on the way. Maybe Maggie had decided not to go as far as Springfield, or maybe she had planned to continue on after a brief stop. Either way, it was his first solid lead. The next northbound train would not leave until morning, so Emmett spent the rest of the day preparing for his search. He replenished his supplies, purchased a bit of food that would travel well, and wrote a letter to his younger sister in Tennessee, letting her know his plans had changed slightly, but that he was well. He also spent a few hours reading more of Maggie's diary, knowing he was invading her privacy, yet unable to stop himself from learning more about the woman he was determined to find. She wrote about her mother's illness with such tender detail that Emmett found his eyes burning. She described sitting by the bedside, reading poetry aloud while her mother grew weaker each day, determined to fill those final weeks with beauty and love. She wrote about her father's transformation afterward, how he had closed himself off, unable to bear the weight of his grief and so choosing numbness instead. She wrote about taking on her mother's roles in the household at 17, managing the cooking and cleaning and trying to care for her younger brother, while she herself was drowning in loss. Her observations about the world around her revealed a sharp mind and generous heart. She noticed things others overlooked, the way the butcher's wife always looked tired, suggesting she might be ill, or how the minister's sermons had grown increasingly focused on duty and obedience while rarely mentioning love and compassion. She questioned why women could not attend university alongside men, why their value seemed determined solely by their ability to marry well and produce children. She dreamed of a world where every person, regardless of gender or circumstance, could pursue their own path toward fulfillment. Emmett found himself thinking that he would have liked Maggie's mother. Any woman who raised a daughter to think so independently, to value her own voice and resist the easy path of conformity, must have been remarkable. He also found himself increasingly angry on Maggie's behalf at her father and this Mr. Winters. How could they not see the extraordinary person she was? How could they treat her like a problem to be solved rather than an individual with her own dreams and rights? The train to Verona departed at 8 the following morning. Emmett claimed a seat by the window and watched the Missouri countryside roll past, all green hills and scattered farms, small towns appearing like mirages before fading back into the landscape. He kept the diary carefully tucked in his inside coat pocket, protective of it now that he knew its full significance. It was not just a record of thoughts but a legacy from mother to daughter, a tangible connection across the divide of death. Verona was a farming community of perhaps 300 souls, built around a central square with a general store, a church, a tiny schoolhouse, and a handful of other businesses. Emmett started at the hotel, a two-story structure that looked like it had been built shortly after the war. The clerk, a young man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger with an eager expression, probably grateful for something to break the monotony of a slow day. "Help you, sir? I hope so. I am looking for a young woman who might have come through here 2 days ago." Dark hair, traveling alone with a carpetbag and a trunk. She would have gotten off the train, possibly looking for lodging or asking about teaching positions. The clerk's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, yes, sir. A Miss Norton stopped here, asking about rooms. We had a vacancy, but she decided not to take it. Said she was continuing on to Aurora the next day, just needed directions to the church. I pointed her that way, and that is the last I saw of her." Miss Norton. Maggie had given a false name, smart when trying to avoid being tracked by her father. "Did she seem well?" "Not in any distress. Seemed tired, maybe a bit worried, but polite as could be." "Why are you looking for her, if you do not mind my asking?" "She is not in some kind of trouble, is she?" "No trouble. She lost something valuable and I am trying to return it." "Did she mention anything about Aurora specifically?" "Why she was heading there?" The clerk shook his head. "Just that she had business there. Sorry I cannot be more help." Emmett thanked him and headed toward the church, thinking Maggie might have sought guidance or assistance from the minister. Churches often knew about teaching positions or families needing help, and a woman alone might naturally turn to such a place for support. The white-painted structure sat at the edge of town, modest but well-maintained, with a small cemetery spreading out behind it like a garden of stones. The minister's wife answered his knock, a woman in her 40s with flour on her hands and a harried expression. 3 young children peeked around her skirts, curious about the stranger. When Emmett explained his purpose, using the same careful description and the name Miss Norton, the woman's face softened. "Oh yes, The poor dear came by 2 evenings ago. She was hoping we might know of teaching positions, but the schoolhouse here already has a teacher, and I could not think of anyone nearby looking to hire. I offered her supper, and she stayed for a bit, playing with the children. They took to her right away. She has a gift with little ones, patient and kind but firm too when needed. She mentioned she had heard Aurora might have an opening at their school. This was good information. If Maggie was specifically following leads about teaching positions, that narrowed down where she might go and who she might contact. Teachers were often known to each other through informal networks, especially in smaller communities where everyone kept track of who was hiring and who was looking for work. Did she seem well? Safe? Worried, I would say. She looked over her shoulder a fair bit, and I got the sense she was running from something, or someone. I did not pry, but I said a prayer for her after she left. I hope she finds what she is looking for. Emmett thanked the minister's wife and made his way back to the train station. The next train to Aurora would not depart until the following morning, which meant another night's lodging, more money spent, and more time between Maggie and her diary. But he could not rush this. Each town gave him new information, a clearer picture of her movements and state of mind. He was getting closer. That evening, as he ate a simple dinner at the hotel's small restaurant, Emmett opened the diary again. He had reached entries from about 6 months ago, before the situation with Mr. Winters had become urgent. These pages showed a different Maggie, still thoughtful and questioning but with more hope, less desperation. She wrote about teaching Sunday school at her church, and how one of the younger girls had asked why God made women if men were supposed to be in charge of everything. Maggie had struggled to answer in a way that felt honest while not contradicting church doctrine too directly. She wrote about a traveling theater company that had come through Carthage, performing Shakespeare. She had scraped together enough money to attend and had been transfixed by the actress playing Portia, her voice ringing through the tent with such conviction and power. After the show, Maggie had approached the actress, compelled to tell her how moving the performance had been. The woman had clasped Maggie's hands and told her that every person had a stage, a place where they could speak their truth and change the world, even if just a little. Maggie had thought about those words for weeks afterward, wondering what her stage might be, where she might stand and speak and matter. Emmett found himself falling a little in love with this woman he had never met. Not in a romantic sense, not yet, but in the way you fall in love with a character in a particularly good book, someone whose inner life becomes as real to you as your own thoughts. He admired her courage and her refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. He admired her honesty with herself, the way she acknowledged fear and doubt while still pushing forward. He wanted to know her, to hear her voice speaking these words aloud, to see her face when she laughed or grew passionate about some injustice. It was a strange feeling, this connection to someone he had never met, based entirely on her private writings. Yet it felt genuine, perhaps more genuine than many interactions he had had with people he saw every day. Maggie had poured herself onto these pages without artifice or performance, and in doing so, had revealed herself more fully than most people ever did face to face. The train to Aurora the next morning was crowded with farmers heading to market and families visiting relatives. Emmett found himself squeezed between a woman with a basket of eggs and a man who smelled strongly of tobacco. He kept his hand on his coat pocket, protective of the diary, and watched the landscape change as they traveled northeast. The land here was hillier, with more trees breaking up the farm fields and streams cutting silver ribbons through the green. Aurora was larger than Verona, maybe 700 or 800 people, with a more prosperous look to its buildings. Silver mining had been good to this area, and even though the biggest strikes were in other parts of Missouri, enough ore had been found locally to bring money and optimism. The main street bustled with activity, wagons and riders moving in both directions, shoppers going in and out of stores, children playing in the spaces between buildings. Emmett headed straight for the schoolhouse, figuring that was the most logical place to start. The one-room building sat on the outskirts of town, painted red with white trim, a bell tower rising from the roof. School was in session, and through the windows, he could see rows of students bent over their slates while a middle-aged woman pointed at something written on the chalkboard. He waited outside, not wanting to interrupt lessons, and eventually, the teacher called a recess. Children poured out the door like water from a dam, shouting and running, instantly transforming from orderly students to wild creatures reveling in freedom. The teacher followed them out, wiping chalk dust from her hands and looking tired but content. "Can I help you?" she asked when she spotted Emmett waiting by the steps. He introduced himself and explained that he was looking for a Miss Norton who might have inquired about teaching positions. The woman's expression grew guarded. "Why are you looking for her? I have something that belongs to her, a personal item she lost. I am trying to return it." "Are you family?" "No, madam, just someone trying to do right by a stranger." The teacher studied him much as Aunt Clara had, weighing his words and demeanor. After a long moment, she seemed to reach a decision. "A young woman by that name came by 3 days ago. She had heard we might need a teacher, but I am not going anywhere. I have taught here for 15 years, and I plan to teach for 15 more, God willing. I told her she might try Marionville or Springfield, as both have growing populations and often need teachers." She seemed disappointed but grateful for the information. We spoke for a while about education and students. She was bright, clearly passionate about teaching. I wished I could have helped her more. "Did she say where she was going next?" "Marionville, I believe. She said she would take the next train there." Emmett thanked the teacher and headed back toward the town center. He was now 3 days behind Maggie, but at least the trail remained warm. She had been methodical in her search, following logical leads from town to town, and as long as she continued that pattern, he could continue tracking her. He found himself hoping she was being careful, not trusting strangers too easily, watching her money. A woman alone was vulnerable in ways that made his chest tight when he thought about it too long. He purchased a ticket for the afternoon train to Marionville and spent the intervening hours walking around Aurora, getting a feel for the place. He stopped at a small cafe for lunch, and while eating a surprisingly good beef stew, he overheard 2 women at the next table discussing the upcoming 4th of July celebration. It was late June now, so Independence Day was less than a week away. Most towns would be planning festivities, which might affect whether businesses were open and how easy it would be to ask questions and find information. The diary came out again during the train ride to Marionville. Emmett had reached the section where Mr. Winters first entered Maggie's life. Her father had invited the man to dinner, describing him as a successful businessman from Springfield who owned a freight company and several properties. Maggie's first impression had not been favorable. She wrote that Mr. Winters had been polite enough, but had spoken to her as though she were a child, dismissing her opinions on the political topics the men discussed and steering conversation toward what he clearly considered more appropriate feminine interests, namely fashion and housekeeping. After that dinner, Frederick Nolan had informed his daughter that Mr. Winters had expressed interest in courting her. Maggie had been shocked, having given no encouragement and feeling no attraction. She had tried to tell her father she was not interested, but he had waved away her objections. "Mr. Winters was a good match," he said. "Stable, successful, established. At 29, he was looking to marry and start a family, and he found Maggie's quiet manner and pleasant appearance suitable for his needs. The phrase had made Emmett's jaw clench the first time he read it, and it bothered him just as much upon rereading. Maggie was not merchandise to be evaluated for suitability. She was a person with her own needs, her own dreams, her own right to choose her path. The courtship had been brief and increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Winters had called on Maggie weekly, bringing flowers and taking her for chaperoned walks. He had talked mostly about himself, his business successes, his plans for expansion, the kind of house he intended to build, the number of children he wanted. When Maggie had tried to discuss books or ideas, he had smiled indulgently and changed the subject. When she had mentioned wanting to teach, he had laughed and said there would be no need for her to work once they were married. He would provide for her, and her job would be managing his household and raising his children. After 2 months of this, Mr. Winters had formally proposed, and Frederick Nolan had accepted on his daughter's behalf without even consulting her first. The engagement had been announced in the local newspaper before Maggie even knew it was happening. She had felt trapped, voiceless, erased. And so she had started planning her escape. Reading her account of those weeks, Emmett felt a deep well of anger at the men who had treated Maggie's life as something they had the right to arrange. He also felt profound respect for her courage in refusing to accept their plan. Many women in her position would have felt they had no choice, would have gone through with the marriage and spent the rest of their lives quietly suffocating. But Maggie had chosen herself, had valued her own happiness and autonomy enough to risk everything for it. Marionville appeared through the train window, another agricultural community, this one built around a limestone quarry that had attracted workers and commerce. The afternoon sun beat down hard as Emmett disembarked, and he was grateful for the shade of the awning over the station platform. A quick conversation with the station master yielded no immediate information about Maggie, but the man directed Emmett to the boarding house where most single travelers stayed. The boarding house was run by an elderly couple, the Hendersons, who had converted their large home into lodging after their children had grown and moved away. Mrs. Henderson answered Emmett's knock, wiping her hands on a dish towel and squinting up at him with eyes that had seen many decades of travelers. "I am looking for a Miss Norton. She would have arrived here maybe 2 or 3 days ago, asking about teaching positions or a place to stay." Mrs. Henderson's weathered face creased into a smile. "Oh, that sweet girl. Yes, she stayed here 2 nights. Lovely young woman, very polite, helped me with the dishes without being asked. She was looking for teaching work, and I sent her to talk to the school board chairman, Mr. Phillips, but he told her they had just hired someone for the coming year." "Is she still here?" "No, she left yesterday morning, took the train toward Springfield. She seemed discouraged, poor thing. I gave her some biscuits wrapped in cloth for the journey and told her to keep her chin up. 'The right position will come along,' I said." Springfield. Finally, confirmation that Maggie had continued to her original destination. Springfield was a good-sized town, big enough that finding one person might prove challenging, but it also had more resources, more potential teaching positions, and hopefully, a safe place for Maggie to land. Emmett thanked Mrs. Henderson and checked the train schedule. The next train to Springfield would not leave until the following morning, which meant another night's delay. He took a room at the boarding house, and after settling in, he walked around Marionville, thinking through his approach once he reached Springfield. The city would have multiple schools, churches that might know of openings, and a newspaper that likely advertised positions. If Maggie was using the name Miss Norton, she might have difficulty getting hired, as schools typically wanted references and background information. But if she was as bright and capable as her diary suggested, someone might take a chance on her. That evening, sitting in the small parlor of the boarding house, Emmett read more of the diary by lamplight. He had reached the entries written during Maggie's first days in Silver Reef with Aunt Clara. She described the relief of being away from Carthage, away from her father's disappointment and Mr. Winters's presumptuous planning. She had felt like she could breathe again, could think her own thoughts without someone immediately contradicting or dismissing them. She had spent her days helping Aunt Clara with household tasks, and her evenings reading or walking through the town, observing the rhythms of life in this new place. She had visited the local school, watching the children at recess and imagining herself in the teacher's role, guiding them through lessons, encouraging their curiosity, helping them see the world as vast and full of possibilities. She had felt hope beginning to take root, a fragile seedling but growing nonetheless. Then her father's letter had arrived, destroying that peace. He was coming to Silver Reef, bringing Mr. Winters with him. They would discuss this matter in person, he wrote, and she would see reason. The engagement would proceed. The wedding was planned for August. Maggie needed to stop this foolishness and come home to honor her obligations. The entry following that letter was raw with emotion. Maggie had written about feeling hunted, about the exhaustion of constantly running. She had questioned whether she was being selfish, whether her father was right that she owed him obedience and Mr. Winters consideration. But then she had thought about her mother, about the stories her mother had told of her own youth, how she had insisted on choosing her own husband, had refused two perfectly suitable men before meeting Frederick Nolan, and knowing he was the one. Her mother had taught her that love mattered, that the person you married would shape every day of your life, and that settling for anything less than true partnership was a betrayal of yourself and your future. So Maggie had packed her bags again, said a tearful goodbye to Aunt Clara, and boarded the train toward an uncertain future. And somewhere along that journey, she had lost this diary, this record of her struggle and her courage. Emmett carefully closed the book and held it against his chest, feeling the weight of responsibility. This was not just about returning a lost object anymore. This was about finding Maggie before her father did, making sure she was safe, helping her if he could. He had become invested in her story, in her survival, in her success. She deserved to find her teaching position, to build the life she wanted, to be free. The train to Springfield departed at 9 the next morning. The journey took several hours, and Emmett used the time to plan his strategy. Springfield was the third largest city in Missouri, with probably 8,000 or 9,000 residents, a far cry from the small towns he had been searching. The anonymity such a place offered would have appealed to Maggie, making it harder for her father to find her, but it also made Emmett's task more difficult. He decided to start with schools and churches, as those were the most logical places for a woman seeking a teaching position. He would also check hotels and boarding houses, though there would be many more options in a city this size. If Maggie was being cautious, she might have registered under yet another false name, but hopefully, the description would be enough. Springfield sprawled across the hills, a mix of brick buildings and wood structures, streets busy with commerce and industry. The railroad station itself was impressive, a substantial building that spoke to the city's importance as a regional hub. Emmett gathered his few possessions and stepped out into the late morning heat, immediately struck by the noise and activity. After days in small, quiet towns, the urban bustle felt almost overwhelming. He found lodging at a modest hotel on South Street and then began his methodical search. The city had several schools and he visited each one, speaking with teachers, administrators, and school board members. Yes, they had had inquiries about positions, several in fact, as teaching was one of the few respectable professions open to educated women. One principal thought he might have spoken with a Miss Norton, but he could not be certain. The descriptions started to blur together after a while. He said apologetically, "Churches proved more helpful." At the Third Presbyterian Church, the minister's wife remembered a young woman who had attended Sunday services alone and had asked afterward about teaching opportunities. "She had such an intelligent face," the woman said, "and when she spoke, you could tell she really listened to the responses." Not everyone does that, you know. Most people are just waiting for their turn to talk. But this young woman, she listened. Did she say where she was staying? She mentioned a boarding house on College Street, I believe. One run by a Mrs. Thatcher. Emmett found the boarding house easily enough. A 3-story home with a neat garden and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Thatcher herself answered the door. A thin woman with sharp eyes and an air of someone who missed nothing happening under her roof. Miss Norton. Yes, she took a room here 4 days ago. Paid for a week in advance. Quiet girl, keeps to herself mostly. Goes out during the day, I assume looking for work, and comes back in the evenings. Is she in some sort of trouble? Emmett's heart raced. 4 days ago she was here. She was still here. No trouble at all. I have something that belongs to her, something she lost. Is she in now? She left this morning. Said she was going to inquire at the new school they are building on the east side of town. They will be needing teachers when it opens in the fall. You might try there. The east side school was still under construction, the frame up but the walls incomplete. Workers moved around the site, sawing and hammering, and the smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the air. Emmett found the foreman, a burly man with sawdust in his beard, and asked about the young woman who had been inquiring about teaching positions. Oh sure, she was here earlier. Talked to Mr. Brennan. He is the school board fellow overseeing this project. They were speaking for quite a while over by those trees yonder. Seemed to go well from what I could see. She left maybe 2 hours ago, headed back toward town. 2 hours. Emmett had just missed her. He hurried back toward College Street, hoping to catch Maggie at the boarding house. His mind spun with how he would introduce himself, what he would say. "Hello, I am a complete stranger who has been reading your most private thoughts for the past week and tracking you across Missouri." That would surely go over well. No, he would need to be honest but tactful. He would explain that he found the diary on the train, had read only enough to determine who it belonged to and where she had gone, and had wanted to make sure it was returned safely. He would apologize for any invasion of privacy, assure her he meant no harm, and then leave her in peace. Simple. Straightforward. Nothing strange about it at all, except he knew it was strange. He knew that his investment in her story had gone beyond simple Good Samaritan duty. He had spent a week reading her most intimate thoughts, learning her fears and dreams, coming to admire and care about this woman he had never laid eyes on. And now he was about to meet her in person, carrying all that one-sided knowledge, while she would see only a stranger with a found object. The boarding house appeared ahead, and Emmett slowed his steps, suddenly nervous. What if she was angry? What if she felt violated by his reading the diary? What if she thought he was working for her father, some trick to locate and trap her? He had to approach this carefully, had to make her understand his intentions were good. He climbed the steps to the front porch and knocked. Mrs. Thatcher answered again, and when Emmett asked if Miss Norton had returned, the landlady shook her head. "Have not seen her since this morning. But you are welcome to wait in the parlor if you like. I am sure she will be back before supper." Emmett accepted the offer, taking a seat in the modestly furnished front room where several other boarders sat reading or doing needlework. He kept the diary in his coat pocket, one hand resting over it, and watched the door. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Other boarders came and went. The afternoon light shifted and dimmed. Mrs. Thatcher announced that supper would be served at 6 for those who had paid for meals. At 5:45, the front door opened, and a young woman entered, pausing to remove her bonnet and shake the dust from her skirts. Emmett knew her immediately, though he had never seen her before. Something about the way she moved, the expression on her face, a mix of exhaustion and determination, matched the voice he had been hearing in his head for days. Maggie Nolan was smaller than he had imagined, probably barely reaching his shoulder, with dark brown hair that did indeed seem to have a mind of its own, curling at her temples despite being pinned back. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though at the moment it was drawn with fatigue. Her eyes, when she glanced around the room and her gaze fell on him briefly before moving on, were indeed the color of creek water after a storm, a gray-green that seemed to shift in the changing light. She turned toward the stairs, clearly intending to go to her room before supper, and Emmett stood quickly. "Miss Norton," she froze, one hand on the banister, and turned back to face him. Up close, he could see the wariness in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed. "Yes." "My name is Emmett Crawford. I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. It is about something you lost." The wariness deepened into alarm. "I do not know you, sir, and I have not lost anything that I am aware of." "On the train from Silver Reef," Emmett said gently, pulling the diary from his pocket. "You lost this." All the color drained from Maggie's face. She stared at the leather-bound book in his hands as though seeing a ghost. Her lips parted, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then she moved quickly across the room, reaching for the diary with trembling hands. "Where did you find this? How did you have it? Have you read it?" The last question came out sharp, and Emmett heard the fear and anger underneath. He held the diary out to her, and she snatched it, clutching it against her chest protectively. "I found it on the train after you had disembarked. I did not know who it belonged to initially, so yes, I read some entries to determine who you were and where you might have gone. I apologize for invading your privacy. I was only trying to find you to return it." "Some entries. How many is some?" Her voice had risen, and the other boarders were openly watching now, intrigued by the drama unfolding in their parlor. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private," Emmett suggested, acutely aware of their audience. Maggie looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that they had an audience. She pressed her lips together, clearly trying to regain her composure. "Very well. The garden behind the house. 5 minutes. I need to put this in my room first." She disappeared up the stairs, and Emmett made his way through the house to the back garden, a small but pleasant space with flower beds and a bench under a shade tree. He waited there, rehearsing what he would say, knowing this conversation would determine whether Maggie saw him as a helpful stranger or a threatening one. When she appeared, she had removed her traveling coat and washed her face, though the wariness remained in her eyes. She stood several feet away from him, maintaining distance, the diary still clutched in one hand. "How much did you raid?" "More than I should have," Emmett admitted. "I told myself I would read only enough to find you, but your words drew me in. I learned about your mother, your father, Mr. Winters, about your dream of teaching and your determination to choose your own path. I learned about your courage and your struggle, and I wanted to help if I could." "Help?" Maggie's laugh was bitter. "You tracked me across half of Missouri, reading my most private thoughts, invading every intimate corner of my mind, and you call that help? I know how it sounds. I know I had no right. But I also know what this diary means to you. It was your mother's. It is your record of everything you have been through. I could not just leave it on the train or turn it over to some clerk who would toss it in a lost and found box where you might never recover it. So you decided to become my guardian angel, to follow me from town to town." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, but Emmett heard the hurt underneath. She felt exposed, vulnerable, violated in a way that words could not fully capture. "I wanted to return something precious to its owner. That is all. I will go now. You have your diary back, and I will trouble you no further. I am sorry for any distress I have caused." He turned to leave, feeling the weight of his failure. He had wanted to help, but all he had done was make things worse. "Wait." Maggie's voice stopped him. He turned back to find her studying him with those storm-colored eyes, searching for something in his face. "You came all this way, spent your time and money, just to return a diary to someone you have never met?" "Yes." "Why?" Emmett considered lying, offering some simple explanation that would not reveal how much he had come to care about her story. But she deserved the truth, even if it made him seem foolish or strange. "Because your words mattered. Because I could see in your writing how much you were struggling, how alone you were, and I thought if I could do one thing to help, if I could bring you this one piece of comfort, then maybe it would be worth it. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know we are strangers. But your diary made me feel like I knew you, like I understood what you were fighting for, and I wanted to be on your side." Maggie's expression softened slightly. She looked down at the diary in her hands, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. "I thought I had lost this forever. I have been sick about it, imagining some stranger reading my thoughts, or worse, my father somehow getting hold of it and using it to track me down. It has been a miserable few days. I am sorry, I truly am. You should not have read it." Her voice was firm but no longer angry. "Those thoughts were mine, private and personal. But I understand why you did, and I suppose I am grateful that it was someone who wanted to return it rather than someone with ill intentions." She paused, then added quietly, "Thank you for bringing it back to me. You are welcome. I will leave you in peace now." "Where are you staying?" The question surprised him. "The hotel on South Street." "Why?" "Because I want to know where to find you if I decide I want to talk more. You know everything about me, Mr. Crawford. It seems only fair that I have the opportunity to know something about you if I choose to take it." Emmett felt a spark of hope. "I would like that, very much." Maggie nodded, still keeping her distance, still wary but perhaps slightly less so. "I need to think. This has all been rather overwhelming, but perhaps I will come by tomorrow, perhaps. I will be there." She turned and walked back toward the house, and Emmett watched her go, his heart both heavy and hopeful. He had returned the diary, fulfilled the mission he had set for himself. But somehow, that felt like only the beginning of the story rather than its end. That night, lying in his hotel room, Emmett could not stop thinking about Maggie's face when she had first seen the diary, the mix of relief and fear and anger. He felt terrible about causing her distress, but he also felt the rightness of his decision to track her down. She had her mother's diary back. Whatever came next, at least he had accomplished that much. Sleep came in fits and starts, and when morning arrived, Emmett rose feeling unrested but determined. He washed and dressed carefully, then went downstairs to the hotel's small dining room for breakfast. He had no idea whether Maggie would actually come by or whether she had simply said so to get rid of him. He would wait, though. He had come this far. He could wait. The morning stretched on. Emmett read the newspaper, wrote another letter to his sister, walked around the block several times to stretch his legs. By noon, he had convinced himself that Maggie would not come, that she wanted nothing more to do with the strange cowboy who had invaded her privacy in the name of helping. Then, at 1 in the afternoon, she appeared in the hotel lobby. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes, and her hair was more neatly arranged than it had been the evening before. She looked around the lobby uncertainly until she spotted Emmett rising from a chair by the window. Their eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation she crossed to him. "Miss Nolan," he said, using her real name for the first time. "You know my real name, my whole life story, and probably what I ate for breakfast 6 months ago. I think you can call me Maggie." There was a hint of humor in her voice, which Emmett took as a good sign. "Only if you call me Emmett." "Very well, Emmett. Is there somewhere we can talk?" "Somewhere public, if you do not mind. I may have decided to come here, but I am not foolish enough to go somewhere private with a man I just met. Of course. There is a cafe down the street, or we could walk in that park I saw a few blocks over." "The park." "I have been cooped up in boarding houses and trains for too long. I could use the fresh air." They walked side by side, maintaining a proper distance, neither speaking until they reached the park. It was a pleasant space with large trees providing shade, walking paths winding through flower beds, and benches scattered at intervals. A few other people moved about, mothers with children, an elderly couple feeding birds, enough activity to ensure propriety but sufficient space for private conversation. Maggie chose a bench under a large oak and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Emmett sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Maggie said, "I read through some of the entries last night, trying to remember what I had written, what you would have learned about me. It was strange, reading my own words and imagining a stranger's eyes seeing them for the first time. I felt naked, exposed, but also, oddly, understood. You said my words mattered. That is something I have not felt in a long time, that my thoughts and feelings mattered to someone. They did." "They do." Emmett kept his voice gentle. "Your writing is beautiful, Maggie, honest and searching and brave. You have been through so much, and you have handled it with remarkable grace. I have run away from my responsibilities. My father would say I have disgraced the family name by breaking an engagement and leaving my home. Mr. Winters has told people I am mentally unwell, that I need guidance and protection. Running away is not graceful. It is cowardly." "No." The force in Emmett's voice surprised them both. "What you did was not cowardly. Refusing to live a lie, choosing freedom over security, standing up for your own worth when everyone around you wanted to diminish it, that is courage. Real courage. Your father and Mr. Winters are wrong." Maggie's eyes filled with tears and she blinked rapidly, clearly trying not to cry. "You do not know how much I needed to hear someone say that. I have been doubting myself constantly, wondering if I made a terrible mistake, if I should have just done what was expected. But I could not. I could not marry him. I could not spend my life pretending to be someone I am not. You should not have to. You deserve to be yourself, fully and completely. You deserve to choose your own path." They sat in silence for a moment, the summer breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Then Maggie said, "Tell me about yourself. You know everything about me. It is your turn to share." Emmett began to talk, finding it surprisingly easy to open up to this woman who was both a stranger and somehow already familiar. He told her about growing up on a farm in Tennessee, the youngest of 3 children. He described his father's disappointment when Emmett had chosen to leave, to seek his fortune in the West rather than settle into the predictable rhythms of farming. He talked about the guilt he still carried, wondering if he had been selfish, but also knowing that he would have withered away if he had stayed. He told her about working as a ranch hand in Texas, learning to handle cattle and horses, discovering he had a gift for training animals. He described the landscapes he had seen, the people he had met, the sense of possibility that came with each new place. He talked about his sister, Emma, who wrote him long letters full of family news and gentle encouragement, and his brother, who had taken over the farm and seemed content in ways Emmett never could have been. Maggie listened with the same intensity he had seen in her writing, that quality of truly hearing what was said. She asked questions that showed she was not just waiting for her turn to speak, but genuinely interested in his answers. And as they talked, Emmett felt the connection he had sensed through her diary deepening into something more immediate and real. "Why were you on that train?" Maggie asked. "The one where you found my diary. Where were you going?" "Silver Reef." "I had heard the ranches in that area needed experienced hands, and I was looking for work. But then I found your diary, and my plans changed. You gave up a job opportunity to track down a stranger. The job will still be there. Or another one will, but you needed your diary back." Maggie shook her head, something like wonder in her expression. "That is either the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me or the most foolish. I have not decided which." "Maybe both," Emmett said with a slight smile. "Maybe." She returned the smile, and it transformed her face, chasing away the weariness and worry and replacing them with something bright and genuine. They talked for hours, the afternoon shadows lengthening around them. Maggie told him about the interview she had had at the new school, how the board member seemed impressed with her education and enthusiasm, but concerned about her lack of teaching experience, and the fact that she had no local references. She had 1 week to provide at least one letter of recommendation from someone reputable in Springfield, or they would have to consider other candidates. "I do not know anyone here," she said, frustration clear in her voice. "I left Carthage without telling anyone where I was going, so I cannot ask for references from there without risking my father finding out. Aunt Clara offered to write a letter, but she is family, and they want someone unrelated. I am stuck." Emmett thought for a moment. "What about the churches you have visited? Did you speak with any of the ministers or their wives about your qualifications?" "I spoke with Mrs. Riley at Third Presbyterian. She was kind, asked about my education. I told her I had attended the female seminary in Carthage, that I had taught Sunday school and helped tutor younger students. Go back and ask her for a letter of reference. Explain your situation, not all of it perhaps, but enough that she understands you need help. From what you have described, she seemed inclined to think well of you. It is worth trying." Maggie considered this, hope dawning on her face. "That might actually work. It is honest, too. I did help with education at my church. I do have the skills they need. I am not misrepresenting myself." "Exactly, you are qualified. You just need someone here to vouch for that. Thank you. That is a good idea." She paused, then added softly, "You have been very helpful, Emmett. I am sorry I was so angry yesterday. I understand now that you were trying to do something kind." "You had every right to be angry. I overstepped." "You did. But your heart was in the right place, I think." Their eyes met and held, and Emmett felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility. He had thought he was coming to know Maggie through her diary, but this, sitting beside her, hearing her voice, watching the play of expressions across her face, this was different. This was real in a way that reading words on a page could never be. "I should get back," Maggie said eventually, though she made no move to rise. "Mrs. Thatcher will have supper ready soon, and I do not want to be rude by missing it." "Of course. May I walk you back? I would like that." They made their way through the park and back toward College Street, talking more easily now. The tension from their first meeting dissipated. When they reached the boarding house, Maggie turned to face Emmett. "Will you be staying in Springfield for a while?" "I have nowhere else I need to be at the moment. Would you like to meet again? Tomorrow, perhaps. I will go see Mrs. Riley in the morning about the reference letter, but I am free in the afternoon." "I would like that very much." Maggie smiled, and this time there was no wariness in it, only genuine pleasure. "The park again at 2. I will be there." Emmett watched her go inside, feeling like his feet were not quite touching the ground. He had found Maggie, returned her diary, and somehow, impossibly, she did not hate him for his intrusion. More than that, she wanted to see him again. The mission he had set himself was complete, but he found he had no desire to move on. Not yet. Not when this story felt like it was just beginning. Over the next several days, Emmett and Maggie fell into a routine. They met each afternoon, sometimes in the park, sometimes walking through the city, once at a small tea shop where Maggie admitted she had never actually tried tea before and was surprised to find she liked it. They talked about everything and nothing, their pasts and their dreams, their fears and their hopes. Emmett learned that Maggie loved thunderstorms, that she could recite long passages of poetry from memory, that she had once wanted to travel to the ocean, but had never been farther from Carthage than she was right now. Maggie learned that Emmett had a scar on his left hand from a knife accident when he was 12, that he sang when he thought no one was listening, that he wanted eventually to have his own small ranch where he could train horses. Mrs. Riley, the minister's wife, had indeed agreed to write a letter of reference for Maggie. She had been moved by Maggie's honesty about her situation, though Maggie had been careful not to reveal too many details about her flight from her father. The letter praised Maggie's education, her way with children, and her moral character, and when Maggie presented it to the school board along with her application, she had been offered a provisional position starting in September, contingent on a successful trial period. The joy on Maggie's face when she told Emmett the news had made his heart soar. She had hugged him without thinking, then pulled back quickly, blushing, remembering propriety. But for that brief moment he had held her, felt her warmth and vitality, and known with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with her. It was a strange love, built on an unusual foundation, but it felt true. He loved the woman he had met in the pages of her diary, and he loved the woman he was getting to know in person. They were the same person, of course, but also different, more complex and real than words alone could capture. He loved her courage and her vulnerability, her sharp mind and kind heart, her determination to live authentically even when it cost her everything familiar. He had not told her how he felt. It was too soon, too much, too risky. She was just beginning to build a new life for herself, to find her footing. The last thing she needed was some cowboy declaring his affections and complicating everything. So Emmett kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with her friendship. July 4th arrived, and Springfield celebrated with parades and speeches, picnics in the park, and fireworks after dark. Emmett and Maggie spent the day together, joining the crowds watching the parade, eating too much food at the public picnic, and finding a quiet spot on a hill to watch the fireworks paint the night sky in brilliant colors. As explosions of red and gold bloomed overhead, Maggie said quietly, "I am happy. For the first time in so long, I am actually happy. I have a job starting in the fall. I have a safe place to live. And I have a friend I can trust. It feels almost too good to be real." "It is real," Emmett assured her. "You made this happen, Maggie. You fought for it and you won. I had help." She turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the fireworks. "You helped me, Emmett, more than you know. Having someone believe in me, support me, it made all the difference. You would have succeeded without me, maybe, but it would have been lonelier." Her hand found his in the darkness between them, her fingers twining through his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent electricity through Emmett's entire body. They sat like that through the rest of the fireworks, hands joined, shoulders touching, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the connection growing between them. When the show ended and they walked back toward town, Emmett did not let go of her hand, and Maggie did not pull away. At the boarding house door, Maggie turned to face him. The streets were still crowded with people heading home from the celebrations, and the noise and light gave them a strange kind of privacy. "Emmett, I need to tell you something." His heart rate quickened. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about this for days, trying to sort out my feelings. When we first met, I was so angry about the diary, about you reading my private thoughts. But as I have gotten to know you, I have realized that maybe there was something meant to happen there. Maybe I was supposed to lose that diary so that you would find it, so that you would come looking for me, so that we would meet." "I have thought the same thing," Emmett admitted. "I know it is too soon. I know I have no business even considering this when I have just escaped one unwanted engagement. But I care about you, Emmett. These afternoons with you have become the best part of my days, and I do not want to pretend I do not feel that. Maggie." Her name came out rough with emotion. "I have been half in love with you since I read the first page of your diary, and now that I know you, really know you, I am not half in love anymore. I am completely, hopelessly, entirely in love with you." Her smile could have lit the whole city. "Really, really. But I do not want to rush you or pressure you. You need time to build your life, to figure out who you are outside of your father's expectations. I can wait. I will wait as long as you need." "What if I do not want you to wait?" Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if I want to see where this leads right now?" Emmett's heart felt too large for his chest. "Then I would be the happiest man in Missouri." Maggie rose on her toes and kissed him, a soft, sweet press of lips that tasted like strawberries and hope. Emmett held himself still, letting her control the moment, not wanting to overwhelm her. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "I have never done that before," she said, sounding both nervous and delighted. "I wanted my first kiss to be with someone I chose, someone I cared about." "I am honored," Emmett said honestly. "And for the record, that was my first kiss too. Really, really. I was waiting for the right person. I am glad I waited." They stood on the porch, the night air warm around them, the sound of firecrackers still popping in the distance. Eventually Maggie sighed. "I should go in. It is late. I will see you tomorrow, definitely tomorrow, and the day after. And the day after that if you want. I want." As Emmett walked back to his hotel, he felt like he was floating. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. Maggie cared for him. Maggie had kissed him. This was real, this thing growing between them, and it was more wonderful than anything he had imagined. The weeks that followed were some of the best of Emmett's life. He found work at a stable on the edge of town, caring for horses and helping with training. The pay was decent, and the work suited him, keeping his hands busy while his mind drifted to Maggie. He had written to his sister, telling her about meeting someone special, and Emma's return letter had been full of excitement and encouragement. Maggie spent her days preparing for her teaching position, meeting with the current teacher to learn the curriculum, gathering materials, and planning lessons. The school board had been impressed enough with her initial interview to give her a small advance on her salary to help with expenses, which allowed her to buy some new dresses more suitable for a teacher's wardrobe, and a few books to supplement her classroom library. In the evenings and on Sundays, Emmett and Maggie were together as much as propriety allowed. They attended church services, took long walks, had dinner at modest restaurants, and spent hours talking. Maggie read him poems she loved, and Emmett taught her about horses, how to read their moods and movements. They discovered shared passions for justice and kindness, for questioning systems that hurt people, for believing the world could be better than it was. One evening in late July, as they sat on their favorite park bench watching the sunset, Maggie said, "I received a letter from my father today." Emmett tensed. "How did he find you?" "I wrote to him last week. I told him I was safe, that I had found employment as a teacher, and that I was not coming back to Carthage. I explained, as calmly as I could, that I could not marry Mr. Winters, that I needed to live my own life. I had hoped he might understand, or at least accept my decision." "What did he say?" "He is furious. He says I have embarrassed the family, ruined his business relationship with Mr. Winters, behaved like a selfish child. He says if I do not return immediately and apologize, he will consider me no longer his daughter." Her voice was steady, but Emmett could hear the pain underneath. "I am so sorry, Maggie. I knew it was possible. I hoped for better, but I knew." She took a shaky breath. "It hurts, knowing I have disappointed him so deeply, but it would hurt more to live the life he wanted for me. I have to believe I made the right choice." "You did. You absolutely did. I told him about you in my letter, that I had met someone kind and good, someone who respects me as a person. I thought maybe that would help him understand, but he just sees it as further evidence of my poor judgment." Emmett took her hand, choosing his words carefully. "Your father is wrong about you, and I am sorry that he cannot see what an extraordinary person you are, but his blindness does not change the truth. You are brave and intelligent and good. You deserve respect and freedom. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for who someone wants you to be." Maggie leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that as the last light faded from the sky. "I am glad I have you," she whispered. "I do not know how I would get through this otherwise. You have me for as long as you want me." "Forever, then." The word hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and perfect. Emmett turned to look at Maggie, and she lifted her head to meet his gaze. "Forever," he repeated. "I know it is fast. I know people will say we have not known each other long enough. But I feel like I have known you my entire life, or like I have been waiting my entire life to know you. Either way, when I think about my future, you are in it, if you want to be. I want to be, more than anything." Emmett cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Maggie Nolan, I love you. I love your courage and your kindness, your quick mind and generous heart. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be better. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They kissed as the first stars appeared overhead, and Emmett thought about the strange path that had brought them together. A forgotten diary, a cross-country search, a connection built on words before it was cemented in reality. It should not have worked, but somehow it did. Somehow they fit together like two parts of a whole. Over the next month, Emmett and Maggie made plans. They would marry in September, a small ceremony with just a few friends as witnesses. Maggie would continue teaching, and Emmett would keep working at the stable while saving money to eventually buy land for their own ranch. They would build a life together, based on partnership and respect, the kind of marriage Maggie's mother had wanted for her daughter, Mrs. Riley, and her husband agreed to host the wedding at their church, and several of the other boarders at Mrs. Thatcher's house offered to help with a small reception. Emmett wrote to his sister, inviting her to come if she could, and was delighted when Emma replied that she would make the journey, even if it meant traveling alone. She was eager to meet the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Maggie wrote to Aunt Clara, sharing the happy news. Clara wrote back with congratulations and blessings, and the gift of a set of linens that had belonged to Maggie's mother. "She would be so happy for you," Clara wrote. "She always wanted you to find love on your own terms, and it sounds like you have. Be well, dear girl. Be happy." The one shadow over their joy was the continuing silence from Maggie's father. She had written him again, telling him about the engagement, hoping he might soften. But no reply came. It hurt, Emmett knew, though Maggie tried not to show it. She had hoped that with time, her father might come to accept her choices, might want to be part of her life even if he disagreed with her decisions. But Frederick Nolan was a stubborn man, and his pride had been wounded deeply. Emma arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, stepping off the train with a bright smile and an enthusiasm that immediately charmed everyone she met. She was 3 years younger than Emmett, with the same dark hair and hazel eyes, and a quick wit that kept them all laughing. She and Maggie took to each other instantly, talking late into the night about everything from teaching to literature, to what it meant to be a woman trying to make your own way in a world designed by men. "I like her," Emma told Emmett one afternoon when the three of them were walking through town. "She is smart and strong, and she clearly adores you. You chose well, big brother." "I got lucky," Emmett replied. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You were kind enough to return a lost diary and brave enough to track down its owner and smart enough to fall in love with her. That is not luck. That is character." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the early September sun painting everything in gold. Maggie wore a simple ivory dress that Emma had helped her alter, with a crown of flowers in her hair. She looked radiant, her eyes bright with happiness and only a little nervousness. Emmett wore his best suit, borrowed from the stable owner who was close enough to his size, and felt his heart race as he stood at the front of the church waiting for Maggie to walk down the aisle. When she appeared, framed in the doorway with light streaming in behind her, Emmett felt tears prick his eyes. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was his. This brave, brilliant woman had chosen him, had decided to build a life with him, and he could not quite believe his good fortune. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all circumstances. But when the minister asked if they had anything they wanted to add, Emmett found himself speaking from the heart. "Maggie, I promise to always respect your voice and value your thoughts. I promise to stand beside you as a partner, not above you as a master. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your successes. I promise to love you not for who I want you to be, but for who you are, today and always." Maggie's eyes were wet, but she was smiling as she spoke her own addition to the vows. "Emmett, I promise to trust you with my whole heart. I promise to share my life with you openly and honestly. I promise to be your companion in adventure and your comfort in difficulty. I promise to love you with the same courage you showed in searching for me, the same kindness you showed in respecting me, today and always." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathered group erupted in applause. Emmett kissed Maggie softly, reverently, aware of how precious this moment was. They had come so far from that day on the train, when a diary had slipped from a seat and set all of this in motion. Now here they were, bound together legally and emotionally, ready to face whatever came next as a team. The reception at Mrs. Thatcher's boarding house was lively despite its small size. The other boarders had pooled resources to create a feast, and someone had brought a fiddle for music. Emmett danced with Maggie, then with Emma, then with Mrs. Riley and Mrs. Thatcher, while Maggie danced with the minister and several of the boarding house residents. There were toasts and laughter, stories shared and memories made. As the evening wound down, Emmett and Maggie slipped away to the small house they had rented on the east side of town, close to the new school. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. Emma had helped them furnish it simply over the past week, and now it waited for them, the start of their shared life. That night, lying beside his wife in their own bed, Emmett marveled at how much had changed in just 3 months. He had been a drifter looking for work, and now he was a married man with a home and a purpose. All because he had picked up a diary and decided to find its owner. All because he had listened to his conscience and his heart. "What are you thinking about?" Maggie asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder. "How lucky I am. How much I love you, how excited I am for our future." "Me too." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "Thank you for finding me, Emmett. Thank you for caring enough to look. Thank you for not hating me for reading your diary. Thank you for giving me a chance. Best chance I ever took." They fell asleep tangled together, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something real and lasting on the foundation of honesty and respect and love. The next few years unfolded with the kind of gentle happiness that Emmett had not known was possible. Maggie thrived as a teacher, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. She had a gift for making learning exciting, for encouraging children to think critically and question thoughtfully. The school board was so impressed that they gave her a permanent position after her first year, and even consulted her when planning curriculum for the following years. Emmett worked his way up from stable hand to head trainer at the largest stable in Springfield. He had a reputation for being able to work with difficult horses, the ones other trainers had given up on. His patience and understanding served him well, and soon people from surrounding towns were bringing their horses to him. He began saving money seriously, planning for the day when he could buy land and start his own small ranch. Emma stayed in Springfield longer than she had initially planned, finding work as a seamstress and enjoying the independence of city life. She became close friends with Maggie, and the two women often spent afternoons together when Maggie was not teaching, talking and laughing and supporting each other through the small dramas of daily life. In the spring of 1884, Maggie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They had talked about children, had wanted them eventually, but now that it was real, the responsibility felt enormous. Emmett found himself working extra hours to save more money, determined to provide well for his growing family. Maggie continued teaching through the summer, preparing lessons for her replacement since she would need to take time off after the baby arrived. Their son was born in late November, a healthy, loud baby they named Samuel, after Emmett's grandfather. Holding his son for the first time, Emmett felt his heart crack open in a new way. This tiny person was part of him and part of Maggie, a living representation of their love. The responsibility was staggering, but so was the joy. Maggie proved to be a natural mother, patient and attentive but not smothering. She sang to Samuel, read him stories even when he was too young to understand the words, and talked to him constantly, narrating her day as though he were an interested companion. Emmett loved watching them together, loved seeing this new dimension of his wife. When Samuel was 6 months old, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from Carthage, addressed to Maggie in handwriting she recognized as her younger brother Thomas's. She opened it with trembling hands, not sure what to expect. Thomas wrote that their father had been ill, a respiratory ailment that had left him weak and contemplative. In his sickness, he had apparently done a lot of thinking about his family, about the choices he had made. He had asked Thomas to write to Maggie, to tell her that he was sorry for how things had ended between them, that he had been too proud and too stubborn. He wanted to meet his grandson if Maggie was willing. He wanted to try to mend what he had broken. Maggie showed Emmett the letter, and they talked long into the night about what to do. Part of Maggie wanted to refuse, wanted her father to understand how much his rejection had hurt. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, wanted to give him a chance to make things right. "It is your decision," Emmett told her. "Whatever you choose, I will support you." I think I want to try, Maggie said slowly. Not for him exactly, but for me. I do not want to carry this anger and hurt forever. And Samuel deserves to know his grandfather if that relationship is possible. So they made plans to visit Carthage in the summer of 1885, when Samuel would be old enough to travel more easily, and Maggie would have recovered fully from childbirth. Emma agreed to come with them, offering moral support and an extra pair of hands with the baby. The journey was long, requiring multiple train rides and one night in a hotel along the way. Samuel was a good traveler, mostly content to sleep or watch the world pass by the windows. Emmett kept one arm around Maggie throughout the trip, feeling the tension in her shoulders increase as they drew closer to her childhood home. Carthage looked much as Maggie had described it, a prosperous town built around agriculture and commerce. They arrived in the late afternoon and took rooms at the hotel before sending word to the Nolan house that they had arrived. Within an hour, Thomas appeared at their door, a gangly young man of 20 who swept his sister into a fierce hug. "I have missed you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The house has not been the same without you. I have missed you too." Maggie pulled back to look at her brother, who had shot up several inches since she had last seen him. "You have grown." "So have you," Thomas said with a grin, gesturing to Samuel sleeping in Emma's arms, in a different way. They spent an hour catching up, Thomas filling Maggie in on all the gossip from Carthage and asking 100 questions about Springfield and teaching and marriage. He and Emmett took to each other immediately, bonding over shared interests in horses and the outdoors. Finally, Thomas said, "Father would like you to come for dinner tomorrow night if you are willing. He has been anxious ever since he got my telegram saying you had arrived." "I am willing," Maggie said, though her voice shook slightly. "How is he, truly?" "Better than he was, but still not himself. The illness took a lot out of him, but more than that, I think guilt has been eating at him. He knows he was wrong, Maggie. He wants to make it right." That night, Maggie barely slept. Emmett held her, offering comfort without words, knowing she needed to work through her feelings herself. By morning, she seemed calmer, more resolved. The dinner at the Nolan house was awkward at first. Frederick Nolan looked older than Maggie had remembered, thinner and grayer, with a frailty that had not been present when she left. He greeted her formally, shaking Emmett's hand and peering at Samuel with an unreadable expression. But as the evening progressed, the walls began to come down. Over pot roast and potatoes, Frederick asked Maggie about her teaching, and she told him about her students and the satisfaction of helping young minds develop. He listened without interrupting, really listened, in a way he had not done when she lived at home. He asked Emmett about his work with horses, and the two men found common ground in discussions of training techniques and animal behavior. After dinner, while Thomas and Emma took Samuel into the garden, Frederick asked Maggie and Emmett to join him in the study. This had been the room where so many of the arguments about Mr. Winters had taken place, and Maggie felt her stomach clench as she entered. But her father gestured to the comfortable chairs by the fireplace, and they all sat down. "I owe you an apology," Frederick began, looking directly at Maggie. "More than one, actually. I treated you as property rather than as a person. I tried to force you into a marriage that would have made you miserable because I thought I knew what was best. I valued my pride and my business relationships over your happiness. And when you stood up for yourself, when you showed the courage to choose your own path, I punished you for it. All of that was wrong, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Father, let me finish, please. I need to say this." Frederick took a shaky breath. "When I was sick, I had a lot of time to think. I thought about your mother, about how she always said the most important thing we could do as parents was teach you to think for yourselves, to have integrity and courage. She would have been proud of what you did, Maggie. She would have supported you completely. And I dishonored her memory by doing the opposite. She would have understood that you were grieving, Maggie said softly, that you were doing the best you knew how. My best was not good enough, but I want to do better now if you will let me. I want to know my daughter again. I want to know my son-in-law and my grandson. I want to be part of your life if there is still room for me. Maggie crossed the space between them and hugged her father, both of them crying now. There is room, she said. There is always room. They spent 3 more days in Carthage, and with each day, the relationship between Maggie and her father grew easier, more natural. Frederick made an effort to show interest in Maggie's life, to treat Emmett with respect, and to be the kind of grandfather Samuel deserved. It was not perfect. There were still moments of tension, old hurts that would take time to fully heal. But it was a beginning. Before they left, Frederick pulled Emmett aside for a private word. "Thank you for making my daughter happy. I can see in her eyes that she is loved and respected, that she has found the kind of partnership her mother always wanted for her. That is because of you." "Maggie makes herself happy," Emmett replied. "I just try not to get in her way." Frederick laughed, a rusty sound that suggested he had not laughed much in recent years. "You are a good man, Emmett Crawford. I am glad she found you, or that you found her, however that story goes." "It is a long story," Emmett said with a smile, "but I am glad of how it turned out." Returning to Springfield felt like coming home in a way that even returning to Tennessee never had. This was where they had built their life, where they belonged. Maggie resumed teaching in the fall, leaving Samuel with a kind neighbor woman during school hours. Emmett continued training horses and saving money, and by the following spring, he had enough to make a down payment on a small parcel of land outside town. The property was not large, maybe 30 acres, but it had good grazing land, a creek running through it, and a small house that needed work but had good bones. Emmett and Maggie stood on the porch of that house, looking out over land that was now theirs, and felt the future opening up before them. "We could build it up over time," Emmett said, his mind already planning improvements. "A barn first, then fencing for pastures. I could start taking on private training clients, building a reputation. In a few years, this could be a real horse ranch." "And the house has space enough for more children," Maggie added, smiling at him. "If we are blessed with them. You want more, I do. Samuel needs siblings to keep him humble, and I love being a mother, even though it is harder than I imagined." They moved to the ranch that summer, spending evenings and weekends working on improvements while Emmett continued his stable job, and Maggie prepared for the new school year. It was exhausting work, but it felt right, like they were building something that would last, something they could pass on to their children and grandchildren. Over the next several years, their family grew. A daughter named Clara arrived in 1887, named for Maggie's aunt who had sheltered her. Then twin boys, Matthew and Martin, in 1890, who kept them all busy and laughing. The ranch grew too, as Emmett's reputation as a horse trainer spread and more clients sought him out. They built a proper barn, added fencing, and eventually hired a young man from town to help with the daily work. Maggie continued teaching for several more years before deciding to focus on raising their children and helping manage the ranch. But she never stopped being an educator at heart. She taught her children to read and write before they started school, encouraged their questions and curiosity, and made sure they understood they could be anything they wanted to be if they were willing to work for it. Frederick Nolan visited regularly, having sold his business in Carthage, and moved to a smaller house with a housekeeper to manage the daily tasks. He was a doting grandfather, always arriving with gifts and stories, making up for lost time. Thomas had married and started a family of his own, and the cousins grew up close, despite living in different towns. Emma eventually married a kind man who owned a bookshop in Springfield, and they had 2 daughters who spent summers at the ranch learning to ride horses and collect interesting rocks. The ranch became a gathering place for family celebrations and holidays, full of laughter and love, and the kind of joy that comes from people who genuinely like each other, as well as love each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Emmett and Maggie sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the pastures where their horses grazed. The children were inside with Emma, who had come to stay for a few days, giving the couple a rare moment of peace and privacy. "Do you ever think about that diary?" Maggie asked, her hand intertwined with Emmett's. "About how different our lives would be if you had not found it, or if you had just turned it in to the train station." "Sometimes," Emmett admitted. "Mostly I think about how grateful I am that I picked it up. That I was curious enough to read it, that I was stubborn enough to track you down. I was so angry when you first told me you had read it. I felt so exposed, so vulnerable. I know, I am sorry for that. Do not be, not anymore, because you are right, there was something meant to happen there. You were supposed to find it. You were supposed to read my words and understand my heart. You were supposed to come looking for me. All of it was supposed to happen exactly as it did." Emmett pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Maggie Crawford. I have loved you since the day I met you in those pages, and I will love you until my last breath and probably beyond. I love you too. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Inside, they could hear their children's laughter, Emma's voice reading a story, the familiar sounds of home and family. This was everything Maggie had dreamed of when she was running from Carthage, when she was writing those desperate entries about wanting a life she chose. This was what courage and love and partnership could build. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges along with joys. Their children grew up strong and independent, each finding their own path in the world. Samuel became a veterinarian, combining his love of animals with a desire to help people. Clara followed her mother's example into teaching, eventually running her own school. Matthew took over the ranch operations, expanding the horse training business further. Martin became a lawyer, fighting for justice for people who could not afford to fight for themselves. Maggie and Emmett grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still took walks together in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still made each other laugh. They had arguments sometimes, as any couple does, but they always came back to the foundation of respect and genuine affection that had been there from the beginning. Frederick Nolan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1899, surrounded by family. At his funeral, Maggie spoke about forgiveness and second chances, about how her father had shown real courage in admitting he was wrong and working to make things right. She spoke about the importance of letting go of pride when it keeps you from the people you love. There was not a dry eye in the church. Aunt Clara followed a few years later, and when they were settling her estate, they found a box of letters, correspondence between Clara and Maggie's mother from years ago. Reading them, Maggie learned things about her mother she had never known, dreams and fears and hopes. It was like finding another treasure, another connection across time and death. As the new century dawned, bringing with it changes and modernization, the ranch remained a constant, a piece of the old world preserving the best parts of tradition while adapting to new realities. Electricity came, then telephone lines. The children brought home newfangled inventions and ideas from the cities where they studied or worked. The world was changing fast, but some things, the important things, remained the same. On a warm summer evening in 1912, 30 years after they had first met, Maggie and Emmett celebrated their anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch was full of people and noise and joy. 3 generations gathered to celebrate a love story that had begun with a lost diary and a cowboy's decision to do the right thing. After dinner, when the party had wound down and only close family remained, Samuel stood and asked for everyone's attention. "I have something to present to my parents," he said, pulling out a familiar leather-bound book. This diary brought them together 30 years ago, and I thought tonight was the perfect time to return it to them, to remind us all of where this family began. Maggie gasped, recognizing the diary she had not seen in decades. "Where did you find that? I thought it was lost years ago." "It was in that trunk of grandmother's things you inherited from Aunt Clara. I found it when we were going through her possessions, and I saved it for tonight." Maggie took the diary with trembling hands, running her fingers over the worn leather just as Emmett had done all those years ago on the train. She opened it to a random page and began to read aloud, her voice carrying across the gathered family. She read about her fears and hopes during those desperate days before she met Emmett, about the courage it took to run, about the uncertainty of the future. Then she turned to the final entry, written decades ago but never shared. The entry was dated the day after she and Emmett had first truly talked in the park in Springfield, and the words were full of cautious hope. "I met someone today," she read. "A man named Emmett Crawford, who found this diary and spent a week tracking me down just to return it. He says he read my words, that they mattered to him, and I believe him. There is something different about this man, something honest and kind. I barely know him, but I have this feeling deep in my chest that he is going to be important, that meeting him was meant to happen. I do not know where this will lead, but for the first time in so long I am excited to find out." Maggie closed the diary and looked at Emmett, her eyes shining with tears. "I was right. You were important. You were everything." The family erupted in applause and laughter, and Emmett pulled Maggie close, kissing her forehead. "We were both right. This was meant to happen, all of it." As the evening wore on and the stars came out, the grandchildren pestered Emmett and Maggie to tell the story again, the story of the diary and the search and the falling in love. They had heard it dozens of times, but they never tired of it. So Emmett and Maggie told it again, together, finishing each other's sentences and adding details the other forgot. The story polished smooth by years of telling but never losing its essential truth. When the last grandchild had finally been carried off to bed and the house had grown quiet, Maggie and Emmett stood on their porch looking at the stars. Emmett wrapped his arms around his wife, and she leaned back into his embrace. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, echoing a question she had asked him 100 times over the years. "How lucky I am, how much I love you, how grateful I am for every day we have had together." "Same thing you always think about," she teased gently. "Same thing I will always think about." They stood there in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life filled with love and purpose, who had created a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. And it had all started with a diary left on a train, and a cowboy who cared enough to look for the woman behind the words. Years later, when both Maggie and Emmett had passed on peacefully in their old age, surrounded by family who loved them, their children found the diary among their mother's treasured possessions. Inside the front cover, in Maggie's handwriting, were words written shortly before her death. "This diary brought me Emmett, brought me love, brought me everything that mattered. Keep it safe. Pass it down. Let it remind future generations that courage and kindness and love can change everything. That sometimes the right person will come looking for you, will see your worth, will choose to stand beside you. And that when that happens, you grab hold with both hands and never let go. The diary was passed down through the generations, each new keeper reading Maggie's words and hearing the story of how their family began. It became a symbol of hope and possibility, proof that love could triumph over circumstance, that doing the right thing mattered, that two people who truly saw each other could build something lasting and beautiful. And in that small leather-bound book, preserved across decades, Maggie's voice continued to speak, continued to inspire, continued to remind everyone who read it that their own story mattered too, that their words had power, and that somewhere, perhaps, someone might be searching for them, determined to find the person behind the words.